Just now, Professor Zaharom speaking about banning books, it brings to my mind the first book ever banned, and that was Machiavelli's The Prince. And I guess that's a very good example on how banning book is very counterproductive, because if you look at our politicians today, East and West, Muslim, non-Muslim, I mean, it's totally Machiavellist approach, and there is no doubt about it. So banning books, it's not working. That's, you know, a lesson to be taken on. Our next guest, next guest of honor, Datin, Paduka, Marina, Mahathir. No need for any introduction. She has been at the forefront of all public debates in Malaysia, and what I like mostly about Sis and Marina is that they go well beyond the feminist discourse, and they jump on any injustice and any issue to be discussed, whether that has to do with women or not, which is actually a bonus point compared to other feminist movements in the world. Welcome, Dr. Marina.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I have to say that one of the reasons I am here is that considering that CIS takes on many issues, particularly women, one of the things that we are championing is #NoAllMale Panels. So thank you, IRF, for bending a little bit to pressure, and it didn't have to be me, but yeah, here I am, hopefully not just a token. Well, this topic, when Dr. Farouk first asked me, reason a threat to faith and society, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to talk about. And then he said, you know, talk about the books that have been banned, CIS books that have been banned. So I'll tell you a little bit about that, but I think also to talk about, I'll talk about how in the course of 30 years of CIS existence, and we have been around for 30 years, the one thing we've found is that reason is something that a lot of people seem to be afraid of. There's this belief that if you believe, then you cannot reason why you believe. You just have to accept. And that's been very, very odd, thing that we've come across a lot. Our work involves delving into the Quran a lot. The Quran, which is supposed to be the central guide to all Muslim lives. And yet, we found a lot of people are actually afraid to do that because, I don't know, well, because they think that reading it and then being forced to interpret involves a lot of reasoning, which might challenge what they believe. Maybe they have some inkling that the Quran actually says very different things from what they believe, but they don't want any confirmation of that. And therefore, the work that CIS does is not reasonable at all. Also, including the fact that we are women, Muslim women, talking about religion, and that by itself, regardless of what we say, unless it's parroting whatever they say, is unreasonable. So I'll tell you a bit about our experience with the book banning, and I completely agree with Prof. Zaharom that it's really ridiculous banning books these days. But our experience, particularly with the banning of the book of our publication, Muslim Women and the Challenges of Islamic Extremism, which you'd think would be a very reasonable topic to have, was very much an experience of like Groundhog Day, in that at every level of the whole process of going through the courts and all that, we felt like we were having to repeat the same thing over and over again, or we were hearing the same things repeated over and over again. It was a 5-year process. It took us 5 years. It started off in July 2008 when the book was suddenly prohibited by the Home Ministry, despite it had already been on the shelves for 2 years. It takes them that long to read a book in English, apparently, but you know. And it was prohibited and gazetted on the basis that the book was prejudicial to public order. Again, like what Prof. Zaharom put, memudaratkan ketentraman awam. It disturbs the peace. So of course, our response is like, why? You know, what do you mean? It is an academic book. It's actually the report from a conference that we had, an international conference that we had, and people were, each chapter was actually a report on a different country. And actually the Home Ministry objection was to only 7 pages, all of which about Malaysia. So they don't care about disturbing the peace in other countries. Leave it to them, they can destroy themselves if they want, but Malaysia, no. So the notification to the media regarding the banning of the book alleged that the contents tarnish the purity of Islam. The purity, propagandized Aqidah, I'm not even sure what that means, rulings and Aqidah rulings and teachings contrary to Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. The doctrine was contrary to fatwa or the opinion of Jumhur Ulama and caused suspicion and public anxiety. It was news to us that the public was anxious about this academic book. Seeing as by the time it was banned, I think we probably sold 3 copies. But yeah, so we called up the Bahagian Kawalan Penerbitan dan Teks Al-Quran and said we hadn't received the prohibition order, and then they found that they sent it to our old address and it had to be, you know, all sorts of things. And asked why, we asked why it was banned, and we gave, you know, an explanation. This is just academic papers, it's mainly used by academics, and that's it. But they wouldn't take it. So finally, we had no choice. We had to and take them to court. But let me just tell you about, we appealed to them about the ban, saying that even based on JAKIM guidelines, and JAKIM has guidelines, it does not contain any material that could be regarded as prejudicial to public order. And we asked for it to be lifted, but the Sekjen of Home Ministry rejected our appeal, and among the reasons given were the book, and this you'll love, that the book is inclined towards confusing the Muslim community, especially women. So, you know, women are easily confused more than anyone else, especially when they're listening to other women, apparently. And it also attempted to interpret statements about Islam according to the opinion of the author herself. And it is feared this would confuse the Muslim community, especially those who have shallow religious beliefs. So those of you who have shallow religious beliefs, please leave now, in case I confuse you even more. So we tried everything, and finally we had to apply for a judicial review at the High Court. I'll cut the long story short. This went on, like I said, for 5 years. We started, of course, at the High Court. We were given leave to for the judicial review, and the High Court judge, about a year later, Yes, the High Court, no, in 2010, it was almost 1.5 years later, quashed the ban on the grounds that the book is not a threat to public order because it's been in circulation for over 2 years and that it's academic in nature. And as they are wont to do, the government appealed. So we went to the Court of Appeal. Another 2 years later, Court of Appeal again dismissed. Why I say it was like Groundhog Day was that every time we went up a different level of the court, the Federal Council would put forward the same argument against our book, that it was prejudicial to public order. And every time the judge has said, show me where, you know, there has been public disorder, evidence of that. I mean, I think it'd be great if I wrote a book and people went out rioting, but no, certainly not this book. So we won it at Court of Appeal, and of course they appealed that, and we went up to the federal court, highest court, and finally in March 2013, the federal court bench again dismissed their appeal on the grounds that they simply could not prove that this book was causing any form of public disorder, and therefore it was unreasonable to keep, you know, wanting to ban this. So yeah, so I think that it was a triumph of reason by the judges over unreason by the government over this over the case of this book. But I must say that even though the book was unbanned, and we immediately produced a new edition with a tagline "unbanned" on the cover, they did come still at a book fair or something that we were at. They did come sniffing around to try and see whether, you know, anyone went insane after reading the book. But no, everyone stayed very, very sane. So that helped us. It's good to be surrounded by sane people. I try. But we do have another case which I think is even more unreasonable and irrational, I think, but more dangerous in many ways, and that is the ongoing fatwa against us from the Selangor state government. You may have heard about this. This was a fatwa against liberalism and pluralism, saying that these are the most dangerous things. I think we can talk about this whole thing about against liberalism and pluralism these days, but this is I think ours is the one example of a very, very concrete action taken by the authorities on these very nebulous concepts which they themselves cannot define. The fatwa was issued in 2014, and we've happened to find it by accident, literally by accident. Our staff was looking for something else, and looking on the e-fatwa website, suddenly came across this thing. And it said that in Selangor state, the liberalism, pluralism are major no-nos. But what's unusual about that particular fatwa was that it actually named sisters in Islam as the main proponents of liberalism and pluralism, and therefore we should be, you know, acted against. And they even gave an example of how to act against us, which was to demand that the MCMC, the Multimedia Commission, ban websites that promote liberalism, pluralism, and all. So it's a very, very unusually worded fatwa in many cases. Most fatwas are quite general and never detail who they actually mean, but this one actually did. And that's why we were alarmed. We found out 10 days before the the period where you can challenge it was up. We wrote to them, to Jais or Mais, to say, what's this and what's the reason for this? They didn't reply. So on the very last day of the what do you call it, period, we had to announce that we were putting a judicial review on it. This brings up also interesting question because, and which has been played out in court. The judicial review is, of course, in the civil court system. And the fatwa was issued by a state religious body. And we have been going in and out of court, mainly arguing whether the civil court had a right to do a judicial review on a fatwa. And their side has simply been arguing, same thing several times over, again it's a Groundhog Day thing, that if it's a fatwa, then it has to be within the realm of the Sharia court and not the High Court, which to me, I'm sure the legal experts will know better, is quite nonsensical. But, you know, reason has nothing to do with logic or constitutional provisions or whatever. But thus far, we had leave to carry on in the High Court. They challenged that, and then we kind of lost that, so now we are appealing that. So that's the situation, which is basically limbo, and trying very hard to keep it within the civil court system, because I reckon that if we did go to the Sharia court, we probably have no chance in hell to get any justice at all. But it is, the result of all this court cases is that it's distracting from our work. We do a lot of other work, and helping a lot of women in the courts and all that. And it creates an atmosphere of insecurity for us. Since the fatwa, because our office is actually within Selangor, so technically speaking, you know, if the fatwa was ever enforced, we are illegal in the state. You cross the border over into KL, then we're fine. We cross back, we're not fine. But we've had to beef up security at our office, because they can come and harass us, seize our publications, shut us down and all that if they enforce that fatwa. So at the moment we are holding them at bay because of the court cases. And you know, but I think one thing we found through all these court cases is two things. One is that keep it going as long as possible, so that we keep them occupied with this really time-wasting thing, you know, for years and years and years, 5 years for the book ban. And the other is that their governing principle is we cannot lose, meaning they cannot ever lose. So if you lose, you appeal. If you lose, you appeal. Just keep going. I mean, if anything else, it's a waste of taxpayers' money to keep this really insane cases going. But you know, that's what we have to deal with. So the real issue, I think, is that like Prof. Zaharom says, it is to keep the space for alternative ideas, particularly in relation to faith. And we're not, anyway, we're not theologians. We do refer to the Quran quite a bit, but most of our work is built on what we call the lived realities of women. This is what women in Malaysia, Muslim women, are experiencing. They're not happy. about many day-to-day things. A lot of it is related to interpretations of the religion, which are very clearly male-centric, patriarchal, and we need to address that. And that's all we're saying. But somehow, this seems to offend not just the male powers that be, but also some women as well. So it's I guess our approach is to us very logical and reasonable, but then we're talking about religion in which, you know, being logical and reasonable has no place. So we are oddities and therefore challenging. I must say the other thing that we've noticed in all this experience of going to court and things like that, we are also a favorite topic on Friday sermons, particularly in Selangor. And there have been times when people have heard the Imam say, sisters in Islam is bad, go do something about them. Go do something about them. We are very thankful that most people who go to Friday prayers tend to sleep during the sermon, so they didn't really hear this, and and can't be asked to do anything, you know. The other thing is that, and this is where it's dangerous, as you know, this whole idea of liberalism and pluralism has been put forward as the most dangerous thing facing our country today. It is, funnily enough, the reason for LGBT, that's a major threat to our security, plus extremism, including ISIS and all that. And I'm sorry to say, but I have seen a video of our counterterrorism head talking about ISIS and, you know, who they are, what they are, etc., and ending the whole thing by saying that the people you have to watch out for are Sisters in Islam and G25. So we are conflated with ISIS. Although, I think if you ask any of those guys in ISIS, wherever, they would absolutely hate us. They would just think we're the worst kind of women ever. They would absolutely agree with our non-friends here. But yeah, that's the crazy situation that we are in. It doesn't make sense on the face of it, but I guess for them the rationality is let's lump all our enemies, all our detractors, or anyone who doesn't think like us in one group and deal with them as one in the same way. And that's where it's a bit scary. So I must say we had a little cheer recently because one of the people been promoting this idea that cis is only ISIS without the first I, was just really badly slapped down by a ruler and banned from doing many things. That's one of those guys. So, yeah. So, yes, from my point of view, and I'm sure most of you, reason is no threat to faith and society unless it's a threat to power, which is what it's all about, really, ultimately. Thank you.